Hey everybody, we got Wayne and Mark B behind the glass, and we have got special guest Joe Schwartz, who is a friend of mine and a friend of Jerry's, and we've got Jerry. And who we don't have is Dave. That bugger is taking a vacation. You know, he begged us to allow him to be able to do it, and he's off on a cruise with his family. Actually, I'm joking a little bit. He is on a cruise, and he didn't beg us. We actually told him that he should take some time off, and his kids, his adult children, gave he and his wife kind of a surprise gift to go on a cruise. And wasn't it even a week ago, Jerry, that he didn't even know where they were going? He kind of had to figure it out.
Or where he had to be in anything.
Yeah, he really didn't know any details. But anyway, I'm going to actually just stop at this point. I'm going to turn it over to these guys. Really don't have any other new announcements. We are not having any sessions tomorrow, which is the first day in many days we have it. And I did just hear sort of the results of the Elaine Ingham webinar the other day. As an entity, we were actually we promoted it for them, and we earned some affiliate fees. And thanks to a lot of you that came, and we actually had, of the 790 attendees, we had over 300 from our community. And what's cool about that is, if you remember, Elaine did another webinar for them back in the fall, and you know, we were a younger, newer entity then, and I think at that one we had like 75 of our community there. So to go from 75 to over 300 and to be almost half of the total number that were there, it was pretty cool, and I applaud all of you for that. So I'm going to stop with that and turn it over to Jerry and Joe. It's all yours, guys.
Hi, everybody. This is Jerry Peloquin speaking, and with little tears running down his cheek because Dave Roeser is off sailing in the Caribbean someplace, chasing pirates. God bless you, Dave, wherever you are. So today, I have with me Joe Schwartz. Joe is a very experienced controlled environment agriculture grower. He runs the Schwartz family farm up in Massachusetts. He has an advanced degree in agricultural engineering. He's vice president of AmHydro, and he travels throughout the world, and I mean that literally. I don't mean he went to Puerto Rico twice. He travels throughout the world, including Holland, where the home of hydroponics, and he is an expert. I've known Joe for about 5-6 years, and at one point we were partners for about 15 minutes. Anyway, Joe is a real resource, and we're extremely fortunate to have him. And so I'm going to start using him right away. I want to ask him a couple questions, and I think questions that all of us need to know. And I think if you have to title what this session is going to be, it's issues and problems that need to be solved before you put a stick in the ground and before you begin to build a system. And I guess a good place to start is the state of the industry. And Joe knows this about as much as when he speaks at all of the events. He travels and talks to all of the top people in the field, and he knows most of the major growers. So, Joe, with that, in your opinion, where are we in the CEA? What's really going on? Not just what the press is saying and what people are putting out as PR releases, but where is controlled environment agriculture at this point, in your opinion?
Wow. Well, first of all, thanks, Jerry and Wayne, for having me. It's nice to be here and talking to your viewers. So in terms of controlled environment agriculture, it really is, all you have to do is go online and you can see it is one of the biggest hot topics out there. There's a huge amount of buzz from many different angles in the media in terms of food security, modern food production techniques, environmental sustainability, better nutrition for underserved populations, all these different things. And there's a lot of noise in the industry. And you and I have had this conversation where we've talked about there's two industries kind of going on at once. One of which is kind of like the public face of the industry. This is what people come to me all the time. They're like, oh, I heard you're in hydroponics, and I just read this really great article about how everyone is going to be growing food in skyscrapers and on indoor systems, and we're going to grow food on the moon and all this. And then there's what I kind of consider the underground industry, and this is where the real growth in the industry is. We have a lot of growers that are small-scale growers. Some are utilizing existing farms, and they're enhancing their production with hydroponic techniques. Others are jumping in from outside from other industries, but they're involved actively in food production. So a lot of what we're seeing, kind of the public face of controlled environment agriculture, is not the realistic representation of what's going on. So we see a lot with a lot of newer types of exotic systems. You know, there's a lot of advances in a lot of our technologies, but in some of them we're not seeing a correct application of technologies, and we can talk about that going forward. But basically, we see indoor container systems, we see vertical systems, we see all these different types of systems as kind of the be-all, end-all, and they're not. So basically, we have this whole smorgasbord of different technologies, and the real change makers in this industry, the people who are really producing the food, who are really feeding the people and providing green jobs, are the ones that are taking the appropriate technologies and putting them together correctly. So there's a lot going on in the industry. There's a lot that is, you know, that we hear about that, you know, is not real sound production technology, but the growth in the industry really is pretty tremendous.
So Joe, you know, my background is management. I'm an organizational psychologist, and working in management, what I've come to realize is that the success of any business is based upon a series of ratios. Mm-hmm. You know, plants per square foot, et cetera, et cetera. And we're seeing an industrial approach to food production, and this industrial approach to food production is considered in some quarters evil. In other words, let's get right to the nub of the problem. There's what I call the religion of dirt, and people say if it's not grown in dirt, it's not as good as you think it is, and there are things missing that should be there and aren't there. Now, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not in a position to make that judgment, but there's a large group of people who have taken the opinion that they're looking at hydroponics in a way as almost being ungodly and lacking trace minerals, et cetera, et cetera. What is your general thought about that argument about growing in dirt, growing in a fixative, et cetera, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Well, understand, I'm a fourth-generation farmer, so I have been, you know, since I could walk, I've been involved in conventional agriculture. So, so I'm deeply connected to it as well, and I do understand the connection that a lot of people have to the soil and to a lot of our traditional farming techniques. And I'm really kind of the mindset that hydroponics is just another production method in terms of, I mean, when we look at even our conventional field production, there's you know, many different types of production, and so hydroponics is just another arm of that. And so as long as you pay attention to what the soil provides and you provide that, there is no difference functionally at all. And so this is where a lot of the debate, we've heard a lot about the organic debate right now, where they're talking about you can't be organic unless you have soil. And I understand the connection with the soil, but basically what the soil is providing is it is providing a media for the plants to grow that dissolves basically all of the nutrient elements that plants need for growth, such as nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, etc., are dissolved in soil moisture. And there's a great amount of microbial action going on within the soil, beneficial microbes, different fungi and bacteria that are decomposing minerals and interacting with the plant roots. And the roots are also getting oxygen from the soil, and they're getting physical stability from the soil in terms of something to provide physical support. So with hydroponics, what we're doing is we're supplying exactly the same things. And if you look at nutrients, and we can talk in more depth about nutrients, if you are using
another discussion, but I think it's a really important one. Yeah.
Yeah. But the actual organic ions that we're providing, whether they're provided in an organic method, let's say manure for nitrate nitrogen, versus in a hydroponic solution, we're supplying the inorganic ionic form of nitrate, which is what a plant in an organic situation absorbs. Plants can only absorb nitrogen in its ionic, inorganic form of nitrate. That's it. That's the only thing it can do. And whether you're growing in the soil or growing hydroponically, you're supplying that. So a lot of there's a lot of misconceptions in the industry in terms of you know, and I understand that, but there's a lot of misconceptions about how actually hydroponic production takes place and what growers provide as inputs. So
Well,
that's something that we have to kind of address.
One of the things that I know, for example, is that if you're growing in a polluted environment, you're going to get pollution in your product.
Correct.
And in places, for example, in the inner cities, and certainly in Baltimore and D.C., you can't grow really in the dirt that's there anymore, because it's been so polluted by generations of automobiles and chemicals and all kinds of things. So what you'll find people growing in raised bed compost. So the question, I guess, it's not a question that we can answer here, but it's a question that needs to be dealt with, and that is, if you have an optimally grown tomato that's grown in a hydroponic system, and an optimally grown tomato that's grown in a soil-based system, is there going to be a significant differential between the nutritional value of both? I don't think there is. I may be wrong. I'm not an expert. You are. But I do think one thing. I think that the time between harvest and consumption is important, as there's clearly a line that deteriorates nutrition over time.
Oh, absolutely it does, yeah.
And if you can grow that, that vegetable or that plant where you get 24 hours between harvest and store, or literally table, then that's going to make up for an awful lot of possible minor deficiencies. So anyway, that's where I'm standing. People may disagree, but that's how I'm looking at it. So okay, go ahead, Joe. You want to make
I was just going to say, but you are completely right. And so when the only things that impact the nutritional content of a specific plant, let's say a tomato plant that we're growing, we can grow it in greenhouse hydroponically, we can grow it outdoors. The only thing that impacts the nutritional value of that plant, if they are both the same, is the actual nutrition that's available, the rooting environment, and the physical environment. And those three factors basically are what allow that plant to utilize those nutrients. So under correct environmental and nutritional conditions, there is absolutely zero difference between the two. Where people sometimes make the disconnect is that in a hydroponic system, the grower is supplying every single input, whereas in a conventional field system, there's a lot of those inputs that are already existing naturally in the soil that are being provided by the soil and not by the grower. So the only difference at all is that the grower is providing all of the inputs in a controlled environment situation. So we've actually tested our hydroponic produce many times against produce that's available at the grocery store, and it is tested consistently nutritionally higher. And it's not necessarily because it was grown hydroponically, it was specifically because the plants received the correct nutritional support, the correct environment, and the correct rooting environment. So I agree with your assumption completely.
So when we were talking about building the world's largest, most effective growing system ever, one of the things that we talked about were dependent variables. Mm-hmm. And that's certainly true in aquaponics, okay? But it's got to also be true in any growing environment. If you're going to control the environment, if it's controlled environment agriculture, if you're going to control the environment, then you need to know what the environment is. And if it's an air environment, then you have the variables there. You know, the pH, the humidity. You have the CO2. You have all of those things that are in the air, and we have the technology to control for them fairly well. I think the Dutch control temperature down to 1 degree per hour, depending upon need. Yeah. And of course, the other major dependent, and there are a number of others, is light. Mm-hmm. And that has become, if you listen to our old friend Graham Dunling tell his stories about the early days of trying to build controlled environment agriculture, where you'd have plants that are in the shade being a foot smaller than the others. But you do have that problem, getting the same lighting values to all of the plants at the same time, so that you have cosmetically identical or as close to identical plants as possible, because that's what the marketplace wants, it is a problem. And so lighting has become a major issue. And I wonder if you could say a few words about what you think the state of the art in lighting is right now.
Yeah, and you're right again. Lighting is really one of the big hot topics in controlled environment agriculture, especially as it relates to specific indoor agriculture, where there is no light source other than what the growers provide. There's no ambient sunlight. So obviously photosynthetically active radiation, what we normally see as sunlight, contains all the photosynthetically active radiation that plants need for growth. So when that is in our natural state, probably 150 years ago, controlled environment ag growers back then understood supplemental lighting. And recently, there have been indoor grows using completely no primary light source, only LED lighting or high-intensity discharge lighting as the only light source. And so that is another variable that now growers are trying to control very tightly. And that's where a lot of the real advances in some of the horticultural technology today are being focused on, is actual lighting to remove the sunlight from the equation, if you will. In a lot of instances, it can be done fairly effectively, but in my opinion, and what I've seen all over the world, is in most cases that's a big mistake. So there are certain applications for supplemental lighting to control the amount of light that plants get in either in the absence or in addition to natural sunlight. But then
when
also
you use the term supplemental lighting, which is key here. In the industrial world, what's going on now is that there's a process called light harvesting.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, what you do is you use ambient light, but you modify the environment to make up for the deficiencies in an ambient light.
Right.
So you're using a combination of natural sunlight and internally generated energy in the form of light. So the question is that technology being applied in any way in modern CEA?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the most common methods right now of light technologies in controlled environment agriculture. As I mentioned before, a lot of the noise in the industry is about indoor farming, and there's certain applications for that, and we can talk about that. But for most controlled environment agriculture is done in the greenhouses using sunlight as the primary source. But probably one of the largest controls put on lighting is the addition of those, the lighting supplement that you talked about. So basically, and there are some cases where growers were actually looking to add additional wavelength, different colors, but the primary driver is sunlight accumulation. So growers in latitudes like we have here in New England, with short days, add supplemental lighting to extend the day length. So basically the plants can absorb a certain amount of PAR, which is photosynthetically active radiation, during the course of a day. So that's the most common. It's also probably the most cost effective. So you're basically using our computer controls to monitor incoming light and only adding light when it's needed. And again, so we're not constantly running lights. We're just using lights when it's needed.
Well, there's a couple issues around that subject. I don't want to get too far afield into a specialized discussion. But when you talk about light, you're talking about energy, and when you talk about energy, you're talking about dollars. And there's the capital expense of installing it, and then there's the expense of maintaining it and repairing it and keeping it running, and which brings us down to money, which is really one of the problems, and to scaling. In other words, we've had this discussion, I don't know how many times, and I think we've come to the point where we pretty much agree, is that you can't take and build a system in your backyard and scale it up to a commercial greenhouse.
People try to do that every day, unfortunately.
Yeah, you can't do that. It's like, in the example I use, it's like if I want you to bake a dozen cookies, you go in your kitchen and get the cocoa out and the butter in your pans and make me a dozen cookies. If I say I want 30,000 dozen cookies, it's a totally different set of equipment and even a different recipe.
Yep, absolutely.
So anybody who gets into the business and thinks that they're just going to scale up you're going to have to take that system and get rid of it and get a new one, or use it and give it to somebody else, or keep it in your backyard. But if you're going to grow commercially, and that's where the next question that I'm going to comes from, and that is commercial growing. There is a point in every industry when, as you're growing, you run through a period where you're not profitable, and you're getting from A to B, and you run through that dead zone, and you get on the other side of that, the economics of scale kick in, and then you start making money. What is your opinion about that general statement, and what do you think about where is that spot? I know there's a lot of dependence. What plants are you growing? Where are you in the country, et cetera, et cetera. But in general terms, can you just talk to that issue?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of debate, and there's a lot of exceptions to the rule. But what we see, and this is something that we do with American Hydroponics, is that we focus on commercial production. Now, commercial production can literally be 1,000 square feet, or it can be like a project that we're currently working on, which is going to be 10 acres under plastic. So the actual ranges of size for a commercial system are quite dramatic. So there's a very, very big diversity. And
we don't see the kind of size that there is in Holland almost ever here.
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't have too much, but we have an abundance of good farmland here. So feeding ourselves with controlled environment agriculture is not, at this point, as critical as it has been for the past 100 years.
Well, I mean, we have to double our production in the next 50 years, so.
Yeah, that'll be easily done, though. We're working on that right now.
Okay.
So
thanks, Jim.
I have no worries about that whatsoever.
Okay.
But yeah, there's definitely certain scale and scope of scalability that has to be looked at. And one of the things that we see in the commercial industry a lot is systems that, as you just mentioned, are designed for a very specific scale. So what we always do, and this is something that we work very hard at, is designing growing systems that, on a small scale, are modular, and they're set up for, again, they're focused around the production techniques, sound horticultural techniques, and a lot of systems that we see today are not, but the systems that we focus on provide all the needs that plants need for growth, proper growth, but also that can be done in an efficient way using worker ergonomics, using the ability to mechanize and expand. So in the industry right now, most growers are under an acre, so under about 40,000 square feet, and then the next jump is to multiple acres. And there is a tougher point kind of at that 40 to 100,000 square foot range, that you're not at the size that a lot of mechanization is feasible, and well below that it's not even a factor. So under 40,000 square feet, using hand production techniques and more human labor and interaction. Using a lot of high-level environmental controls and things like that are important, but in terms of actual crop production, people are involved. And when you start to scale, that's kind of where you have that jumping-off point, if you will,
right,
of automation.
Yeah, my concern has always been that the people, there are some things people do extraordinarily well, and there are some things people don't do very well at all. And pick and place is one of those things. Like seeding, and even harvesting. But seeding more importantly. And so it makes a lot of sense to have a system that does that. On the other hand, the systems are extremely expensive, and the other reason, of course, to automate is to get high quality. That when you use people, you can get quality problems, and it's not because people are lazy. It's just because people aren't capable of doing it. It's just such a tedious process. I see these people on scissor lifts trying to go up and harvest, the tomatoes, and I think, oh boy, there's a disaster waiting to happen. Talk about a workplace hazard. So I've always been a strong advocate for automation, and the question is, how could bring automation down to the point where it's affordable by the smaller operator, who, as you say, is under an acre. That's a real issue. But it is desirable because it will increase the quality of your product and reduce the cost of it as well. And instead of creating a bunch of jobs that are minimum wage, what one wants to do is one wants to create jobs that have a future, that have some value to them. Anyway, so that whole issue of automation and scaling is one that's really critical for the new controlled environment agriculture entrepreneur. And these are questions that need to be dealt with now, not then. You don't want to be trying to figure out how to automate a system once you've laid out your floor plan and committed to an architect. So anyway, moving on. You know, as we said before, there's a lot of hype around the issue of technology, and it's very attractive and very easy to say, well, you know, technology is going to solve our problems, and in many cases it has. But inappropriate use of technology is probably worse than no technology at all.
Oh, certainly. And,
yeah, okay.
and just as a quick point to what you said is that a lot of what we're seeing, the hype that we were already talking about, that we've seen around a lot of the new highly automated systems, again, they're missing the boat. A lot of work in terms of automation, especially with in regards to material handling, is already being done, and being done very, very well within the industry. So that's happening in the private sector, and that's happening a lot, all the time. One of the things that we're really focused on, where this 10-acre project that I had mentioned that American Hydroponics is doing, is actually designed to provide almost 200 jobs to local communities, but jobs that are living wage and good entry-level positions. We're trying to take, one of the problems with conventional agriculture is that obviously most of the labor is unskilled, and living wage jobs are not economically feasible. And so
right.
we see that. So one of the things that we're doing in the hydroponics industry is we're producing, and you had mentioned yourself that the world population is growing and we have a lot of mouths to feed. We also have a lot of gainful employment that we need to offer, but it needs to be jobs that that pay a decent wage, are also safe, are also clean, are also entry-level jobs that can have room for advancement. So all of those things are part of the equation that I think in the automation discussion get left out.
So another issue that is increasingly of more importance to today's entrepreneur is the issue of the triple bottom line. Mm-hmm. You know, economically viable, you have to make a profit or you can't be in business.
Right.
Environmentally sound, you're not damaging the environment in any way. And the third one, socially responsible, a social responsibility. Beginning and running a socially just business. Now, I realize that there are people who don't care about that. And you know, that's not my point. My point is that I think most people who are concerned about the environment can extend that concern to the social issues. Mm-hmm. What you just talked about just then, about thinking about how to build a system that is appropriately job producing, and then of course there's the inner city issue. It makes more sense to grow here and eat here than it does to grow there and eat here. And what are you seeing, Joe, in terms of growing in the inner city instead of growing outside near distribution centers or whatever? You know, distributive food production. What are you seeing in that regard?
Well, both like the appropriate use of technologies for the growing systems is important. So is all of the pieces in the distribution puzzle. So there is room in the industry, and there is a need for larger scale production near distribution points that aren't necessarily in the population centers. However, small scale, intensive, high volume, and high quality production within the communities where that food is consumed is also a very, very important part. One of the, when we did the Sky Vegetables rooftop farm in the South Bronx, we trained the grower. I trained the grower right here in Amherst, Massachusetts for a year. And we placed her. She was a very high-level grower, and we put in some pretty high-level growing systems. And then from that point, we had seven people that were hired to run that greenhouse with her, and none of them, they all lived in the neighborhood, none of them had any agricultural experience whatsoever. So it's important to have experience growing knowledge and management, but the jobs are designed and the systems are designed to provide jobs that can provide gainful employment to people with an interest and an aptitude perhaps, but no agricultural experience. Everything can be very easily systemized. The process is easy to follow and can be very much standardized. So we had people from the South Bronx who literally have never seen a fresh head of lettuce in their lives, now are farmers. And that model is an effective model and doesn't necessarily have to even be a rooftop farm. We have Harlem Grown in New York City as well, where they're growing greenhouses on the ground on a brown field like we were talking about. And they're actually producing food. Young people who are inner city youth who have no potential for gainful employment are now young budding farmers growing high quality sustainable food on a former polluted site. So it's a win-win-win for everyone.
Absolutely. Another factor in the economics of urban farming, if you will, or controlled environment agriculture, really. Another factor is, of course, energy costs.
Yep.
And I told you I went to Bogota and ran this symposium on sustainable growing. And what we came down to the conclusion was that there was a nexus, and that nexus was water, food, and energy. All of those three things are inextricably linked. And the question is, how does one manage that nexus so that you get the optimum result? For example, energy costs. I mean, we're looking at a place in Baltimore that's adjacent to a trash-to-steam plant. And that's going to produce a lot of CO2. It is producing a lot of CO2, and they scrub it. And it's also producing a lot of 110-degree water that they pump around the city. So it's our belief that we could probably reduce our energy costs 60 to 70% by taking advantage of that, I guess I'd call it parasitic heat, or parasitic energy. Sure. Well, those are you guys looking at any kinds of solutions that involve reducing energy use by some sort of collaborative means?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there have been greenhouse facilities built adjacent to power plants, utilizing the waste heat for 30 years, and so that's being done, more and more with great success.
How about public dumps? How about
the methane recapture? Yeah, there's also some systems being done. That again, you have a capped landfill that's in many cases unsuitable for building or other uses that can be very easily put into controlled environment agriculture, and utilizing both methane, which of course will be providing heat and CO2, but then also geothermal heat as well with a system like that. And we also have growers who have farms who actually do large-scale composting, and they actually build compost pits around large heat exchangers. So they're actually drawing heat from compost piles to then heat the greenhouse.
Well, Joe, what it seems to me is coming together through just from this conversation between us, that there are some policy issues that need to be addressed out there.
Sure.
That deal with that issue of where do you grow your food?
Mm-hmm.
Do you grow your food you need growing systems near distribution centers, and you need growing systems in the inner cities. The question is, how do you do that cost effectively, and how do you open up a whole new path for entrepreneurs?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you've done it at M Hydro, and you've done any thinking about what kind of a distributed food production system might be ideal, and how that might be. We talked about this many years ago.
Sure.
About how that might be done. Are you seeing any movement in that direction? I mean, Frontier has just crashed and burned, so that's not unfortunately, a good example.
Yeah, no, actually, and this is something that that through AM Hydro, what we produce, we've actually put together. Now we design and build custom growing systems for commercial growers, and this can be to work with a brand new greenhouse. This could be to work with an existing greenhouse or an existing building. But what we did, because of the need of the industry, and a lot of this is location of food production. How do you put it? And where do you put it? And how do you do that? So we put together what we call the AM Hydro Get Growing bundles. In fact, I encourage anybody that's interested to go to our website and take a look at the bundle packages. And what that is basically it's a hydroponic farm in a box, if you will, and it's basically a greenhouse, a hydroponic growing system, growing supplies, and grower support. And so it's a complete package. And so this package, we just finished one in the Bahamas. We have one going in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. We have one in northern Canada. So you can see we have very, very different ranges of both geography as well as population.
And there must be significant trade-offs there too.
Yeah, absolutely, and there are, and those are considerations when putting together something like this. So with intensive in a city, say an inner city production model where we want to put food production in the city, we have a package that basically is a greenhouse of appropriate size, very, very highly productive, that can be basically situated almost anywhere. Now, as we look at food production in the cities, zoning and permitting is also one of the big issues that some growers are facing and that we've had to address. When we built a rooftop farm in the Bronx, it was the first time I ever had to deal with the city insisting that we install a fire suppression sprinkler system in a greenhouse. Never been done before. So there are other considerations when looking at putting food production in the cities. Again, it's
that's
just
what I meant by policy issues. Yeah. I mean, one of the arguments for having an association in this industry is to help guide those policy decisions, right, because municipalities simply don't have the resources or the expertise.
Yeah, although the one thing is that because this is food production, this is environmental stewardship, this is providing green jobs, it hits so many important points that most municipalities are very, very supportive, and there's a lot of pressure. In fact, you and I, Jerry, met with the former mayor of Hartford, Connecticut years ago on that, so you do know that there's a lot of support for doing that. So I think the wheels are moving on that end.
Well, you know, Joe, I was an owner of 1/3 of a company called Big City Farms up in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And regulations put us out of business. I mean,
yeah,
they literally put the company out of business. Now, it was mainly the management's fault. It happened, let me say, before I got there. But the management didn't go in and do their homework. And by the time they got so, and it's as an argument for dealing with the municipality in which you exist, becoming friends with the understanding how they do their permitting. There's always some kind of chicanery going on. You have to understand that. If you don't, it'll kill you. And so that's a red flag that I think needs to be raised going in. Anyway, go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
Yeah, no, certainly, and that's something that has to be part of the plan. One of the things that we understand in the industry is that unfortunately, it's not quite as easy as going and buying a shipping container with a growing system in it, or buying some kind of complete package that should be just kind of a set it and forget it kind of system. So right, we have to look at a lot of these things, and both in terms of locating our systems as we look at urban agriculture, so locating our production systems and how to do that in terms of site selection, infrastructure, zoning, permitting, all of those factors. Those are all really, really important part of kind of the basic initial planning. They can't be afterthoughts. And food safety is also one that is now going to also have to be rolled into that initial plan. You need to build your business around that rather than trying to, after the fact, bring that into your business.
Yes. With con su permiso, I'd like to take a little bit of a change in direction here. We talked about this a little bit with Dave last week, mm-hmm, and that's the issue of crop selection, and that is geographically dependent. The whole issue of ethnic foods, right, and the opportunities there. And then finally, the last thing I want to talk about is the one that'll probably blow the top off of this webinar, and that's aquaponics. But go ahead. Let's talk about crop selection and how that's regional and seasonal and how that all works together.
Yep, very, very, very important. And 10 years ago in the industry, people that were getting in were looking to grow lettuce, tomatoes, or cucumbers, and that was pretty much it. And that's fine, but basically with controlled environment ag techniques, we have the ability to grow anything at all. It's a matter of economics, real estate, and markets. So is producing lettuce to sell to grocery stores the best model? Well, it's the best model in certain situations. But with a different type of system to grow salad mix to sell through a CSA or some type of community distribution program is equally or more so appropriate in other applications. So that is, again, trying to decide what type of greenhouse to build is very, very, one of the, the factors that go into that are things like, well, where are you? Is it hot? Is it cold? And the marketing, and which includes crop selection, which is the primary driver of crop selection, is that what markets exist that could be exploited, or what markets could be created that could also be exploited. And so, as you mentioned, ethnic crops, in my opinion, are probably the fastest growing, especially in leaf crop production, where we have lettuce growers using NFT systems to grow lettuce, culinary herbs, different greens. Ethnic crops are probably the biggest opportunity for most growers right now.
Yes.
Every region has ethnic populations that are not being adequately served. We have, again, use the Sky Vegetables model just as an example. We have a Brazilian population close to where the farm was, and so we had done some work here in Amherst growing callaloo, which is amaranth, and there was no market for it here. When we moved production to New York City, you better believe there was a market for that. So we put that in production, and people in the industry thought we were crazy, because why would you want to grow that? No one sells amaranth, and we had a tremendous response from the community.
We have an Ethiopian population here in D.C., and they have a very specialized set of crops.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are communities that are generally not served by the traditional fresh produce industry. We have people from the Asian community that come to us all the time and say that it's extraordinarily difficult for us to get tatsoi, or bok choy is becoming kind of now very, very trendy, but for a while baby bok choy was something that they could not get locally at all. And so those are tremendous opportunities. So selections of crops is a really, really important piece. That's one of the things that AmHydro and our consulting we do all the time. I was actually in Vancouver a few months ago at a vertical farm, and one of the big questions that they had was, they needed help in selecting crops that were more appropriate for their production, and a big part of that is we had to look at the communities that they served.
Which brings up another question to the topic, and that is my belief, and maybe wrongly so, that if you wanted to be a successful grower, you need to focus on a vegetable. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying definitely monoculture, but pretty much. If you're going to grow lettuce, you grow lettuce. If you're going to grow basil, you grow basil. What's your thinking about growing multiple crops in a single facility?
Well, again, it's like the technologies for, say, environmental control. It's appropriately selecting and grouping those crops.
So they have the same required environmental requirements as the other crop that you're going to grow with it.
Or similar, and then can be manipulated. We have the Humboldt County Office of Education bought one of our AmHydro Get Growing packages, and they have an NFT leaf crop system, and the students from the high school are running the farm, and they're learning horticultural techniques and farm production and entrepreneurship. And one of the things that they have to decide is, based on their markets and based upon their marketing strategy, is what crops to grow. And so in one NFT system, I believe they have 8 different lettuce, greens, and herbs that are all growing within the same system. So same environment, same nutrition, same actual growing system. And the AmHydro production systems, the growing system, the NFT and the vine crop systems, are specifically designed to be very, very strong and highly productive for a single crop, but also to have the ability to grow a diversity of crops. Because that's very important. And as you mentioned, there are certain applications where a grower should grow all lettuce for a specific marketing opportunity. But most of the smaller scale growers that we see, actually it is in their best interest, and it fits their marketing plan better, to be able to grow a larger selection of crops. So we have to have systems that will allow us to do that.
And another tangential but relevant question, and that is environmental control. Mm-hmm. And the tendency of certain crops to acquire pests, and the kinds of controls that you can install. I remember. Do you remember Gertrude News of Auto? What was it? Something Farm. The guy in Holland. It was a big tech talk. He said that when they went to a semi-clean room environment, which is how they grew. In other words, everybody wore boots and gloves and hats and there was a double airlock in the front and 5 pounds of air pressure inside, and that it eliminated their pests. They didn't have any pests. They never had any problems with pests from that point forward. What do you think about that kind of strategy?
Well, biological pest control, whether it's insect pests or disease pests that we're looking at, environmental control is a big piece of that puzzle. It's not the only one. It's not the be-all, end-all, but it is a very, very important piece. So, go ahead.
So you think that someone who thinks, well, I'm just going to build a clean room and grow in a clean room is really making a big mistake?
I have seen that fail more times than I care to talk about. But it is not the technology that's faulty, though, per se. It is the lack of willingness or ability to, again, with all of it, with nutritional management, with crop management, labor management, environmental control for pest control, it is a multi-pronged, very, very integrated system. This is one of the issues that I have when people say that we should be able to completely automate systems and take the farmer off of the farm. And I disagree with that wholeheartedly, in large part because of that very, very delicate balance. The art and science of hydroponics overlap somewhat, and this is kind of where it is. And so the environmental control to control insect pests or disease pests is a very, very comprehensive, in most cases very hands-on process of controlling environment, insect exclusion, like we talked about, the positive pressure, proper insect screening, certain procedures, clothing that's worn outside not being allowed to be worn inside. But that has to be coupled with very aggressive scouting, crop management, biological parasites and predators introduced on a regular basis. Again, we are creating, and this is where the hydroponics versus soil argument, I think this is where some of the people on the soil only argument miss the boat, is that in a properly run controlled environment ag process, you are incorporating all of these ecosystems, and we probably don't have time tonight to get into it, but just the biological activity in the nutrient solution and rooting environment alone is very, very similar to what happens in soil. So in terms of greenhouse or indoor pest control, it's again that ecosystem that the grower has to help facilitate and create by using certain predators or parasites to, say, attack aphids, but also to use exclusion and also to use environmental control techniques. So again, there's many, many pieces to that puzzle.
It sounds to me like a discipline in itself, pretty much.
I'm sorry?
Almost. It sounds like it's almost a discipline in itself.
Oh, it certainly is, absolutely.
I mean, you need someone who knows that code if you're going to do this.
Yeah, that's something we do all the time for growers, is that we provide that type of guidance, because there's very little there's very little, if any at all, substitute for that experience, which is why I always recommend for new growers or people looking to get in the industry to go and volunteer and intern for an existing grower, because these are all the pieces. So yeah, it's like developing, you can develop, as you as a musician know, you can develop some basic chops in a fairly short period of time, but to be able to understand the intricacies of music and the nuance is very, very
same in every technology.
Exactly.
You flat out with precision, then you end up with generalization so that you can operate. And so that brings me to another place in this discussion, and that is, what we're looking at is an audience that's interested in controlled environment agriculture, but may have just started in it, may be considering moving in that direction, and these kinds of insights are just invaluable. I know that in a good friend of mine worked in the movie business, and he used to say, all of the gains are made in pre-production. You don't change things once you pull the trigger and the camera is rolling. That's not the time to make changes. And so planning, as much as we dislike the term, and it's odious to many of us, we're people of action, right? We want to do things. Sure. Planning is so important, and having the right information, which is my argument for finding knowledgeable people who know what they're talking about. Not someone who's done it once, but someone who's done it 100 times and has seen all of the mistakes and can help you avoid them, because you will make mistakes. You know, as many times as I've started, I'm like the guy with the guy, like I talk about, the guy down in Texas who got a big cowboy hat, got these great boots, and that guy's down in Houston call, you know, never grow anything. You know, it's kind of a joke. But the truth is that I have learned a lot, and when I start now, it's going to be done right, because I have taken 5 years to learn what needs to be done in order to make this work. And one thing I need to know is to call a Joe Schwartz or a Graham Dunling, or someone who really has had the experience, knows the technology, knows what's going on, has seen everything else that's going on in the industry. Normally called market research, but there you go, you can buy it. So yeah. I'm not selling Amhydro, and I'm not selling Joe Schwartz, but if you feel that Joe Schwartz is somebody you want to talk to, he's the man to talk to.
Well, we get a lot of inquiries from growers that are having challenges or looking to plant. And I mean, we built our company. We have around that. We have over 100 years of actual commercial production on staff, and it's specifically because of that. We have a tremendous amount of actual knowledge, but it's based not on all successes, but mostly on phenomenal failures. And yeah, that's where you really learn. And until you get in, I hear from people all the time who try to lecture me about controlling aphid populations and have never dealt with an aphid infestation. And unless you do, you don't really understand a lot of that, or it's difficult to understand a lot of that.
You know, my father used to say, you know, there's a big difference between being told about a kick in the ass and getting one.
That's exactly right, and that's what this industry will do to you if you step in without that understanding that what can go wrong will go wrong, and it's a matter of understanding what could go wrong, trying to head it off, but then also dealing with those things that do go wrong when they do. So it really is a very big learning. There's a very big learning curve, and you know, it's one of those things that I think sometimes we lose in the technology push right now.
So let's talk about hybrid systems.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about and specifically let's talk about aquaponics, because you know it's always been my interest.
Yeah, of course.
Mainly because I see it as an environmentally sound growing model. I mean, why buy commercial nitrates when you can generate your own and produce a value product at the same time? Now, that's easier said than done, as it is proven to have been. And the main problem in all of this is water chemistry. You know, I mean, aside from all the issues that we talked about tonight, aside from people not understanding how to scale or how to manage a business or how to do market research, there are lots of reasons for failures, and you hear about them all the time. Mm-hmm. You hear about failures all the time, and those failures, and one of the reasons for those failures, and has anybody figured out how to solve the problem? Do you know, for example, of any profitable existing aquaponics facilities yourself? I mean, you're out there. You must talk to everybody. What do you talk about that a little bit?
Okay. Well, aquaponics, just like everything we've talked about tonight, is just another growing technique. It's not the be-all, end-all. It's also not something that should be dismissed out of hand. There is, as you mentioned, with the water chemistry, basically you're dealing with two fairly complex ecosystems and two different life forms. So you're managing not only both of them, but you're managing the interaction and very delicate
symbiosis.
Absolutely, absolutely it is. And so that adds infinite complexities. In terms of aquaponics, and you and I have talked about this, was involved with aquaponics back from 1985. And so I've seen a lot in the industry, a lot that's been done. In terms of successful operations, I've seen a few smaller scale operations that have been successful. Scaling something like this, again, because of the management and the literal infinite number of variables that need to be constantly evaluated and managed, makes it very, very difficult to scale. It's not something that will never not be done. I mean, I see a lot of advancements that make me hopeful. but certainly the technology is not there yet, and that technology, the aquaponic technology, is similar to the vertical farming technology, where you hear a lot of people in the industry that basically will stand up and adamantly say that this is the one way, this is the be-all end-all, and those people fail, and they will continue to fail. So it's a matter of.
Go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry.
It's just a matter of putting the pieces together correctly and making that work. But it's not a standalone industry, and it's not going to stand on its own and work on its own. It's one of those things where it's just another production technique that in certain applications can be made to work very well.
You know, there have been at least two approaches to doing this. One of them is that you use the fish essentially as a fertilizer factory.
Right.
It's a self-liquidating fertilizer factory. You know, you grow the fish and you create the nitrates. I don't know about the feed ratios and all the costs, but assuming the costs are in balance, and you use that fertilizer to fertilize your vegetables. And then when the fish reach maturity, you sell them and put in another batch. I mean, it's rotating, but yes, that's basically the way. And I've seen that work. I've seen that work. Small amounts of fish, large amounts of growing, because a large amount of fish can produce an awful lot of fertilizer.
Right.
And then you have the question of what do I do with it? So, yeah, I think there's some, and the problem is I very clearly articulated is that you're dealing with too many variables. You're dealing with plants that have their own environment, another ecosystem, and then you're dealing with the fish, and the fish are animals. And farmers are usually the people who get into this business. And a farmer realizes that things don't happen very fast in a farm. You've got to do when you make the decision, it's better be the right decision, but you don't have to rush down today and do it now. But with fish, it's the other way around. Something goes wrong.
I'm sorry.
Something goes wrong, it's over. In 20 minutes, you got 10,000 pounds of dead fish.
Yeah. And one of the most important ecosystems that people sometimes tend to overlook is the microbial ecosystem. And that is, you know, without Nitrobacter and Nitrosomonas, you cannot convert ammonium to nitrate. And if there's something that disrupts that, people think, well, what if the temperature gets out of range for the plants, or what if the oxygen gets out of range for the fish? But the fish are producing nutrient that needs to be treated, if you will, altered, if you will, by that microbial action. And without the proper microbial environment, basically everything goes to heck very quickly. So you're actually running three separate ecosystems, all that need individual management, but then again, all integrated. So you're correct in saying that people who understand animal husbandry, not just in terms of managing fish populations, but who understand, again, those processes and all the different biological processes that interact with each other.
Yes.
That makes scaling and mechanization very difficult. Not impossible, but difficult.
It does indeed, and it's that problem set that has to be addressed. I want to go back to something we talked about a little bit earlier, and that is automation.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I spent 25 years working in industry, and all kinds of automated. And I was there as the industry was making the transition from analog to digital systems. And so when the controls were going from ladder diagrams to actual code, and saw all these amazing advances in using, for example, Excel alone killed middle management. You know, if it hadn't been for Excel, I couldn't have done a budget. You know, but the point being that in automating these systems, so many systems that we thought, you'll never be able to do that. For example, you know, the Rumba, that little round thing that runs across your living room floor and picks up your eyeglasses for you. Yeah. You know, that's the death of the janitor. You know, it won't be long. Every month there'll be a new improvement. Pretty soon it'll do Windows. You know, so it's the march of AI is inexorable. It's going to continue on. It's going to change, and eventually it'll get there. But it ain't there now. It ain't there now. Yep. And while I have great hope for the future, nothing replaces the guy with the dipstick strip. You know, even when you have an automated system, you want to back it up periodically, right? Because if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. Sure. So you know, what are the takeaways from this discussion? And I trust our audience has seen value. And as I know I'm coming to an end here, but I'm coming to a break point. That the question of when you start up a system, what do you build? What do you decide to build? Do you build a house, or do you do what we were going to do, buy a building and take the top off it, and make the top of it a greenhouse? What kind of technology, and how do you budget, and where do you get the money? And now, of course, the main thing is, where's the money come from? You know, if you don't have a trust fund, then you probably have to go someplace and get money. And at least my experience has been, and of others, is that there's money out there for hydroponics. There are companies that are investing in food technology, and there are people who will do it. And if you do it right, if you do a business plan properly, you can raise funds to do it. But it is not going to be easy. Farming has not historically been a place. There's money for farming technology. If I said I had a control system that would solve the problems Joe was just talking about, I could be rich instantaneously. But there isn't a lot of money out there for people who want to build farm. You want to talk to that issue, Joe? You've been around it a lot recently.
Yeah, and actually, and just as a kind of a note of what I'm seeing now is that bubble that is building right now in terms of a lot of systems kind of coming on the market that are not structurally sound in terms of crop production. That's already some of the failures that we're seeing in particularly the indoor system, but not necessarily always exclusive to that. But some of those failures are causing some hesitation now. Investors are becoming much more savvy and understanding that a lot of that, the shiny object technology is not necessarily so appealing. So one of the things that we look at very strongly, both our company and our customers, is that we have technologies where the growing technologies and control technologies that will, one, do have a track record of performance, that we know these technologies work. We're still always pushing that envelope of technology, but we're not reinventing the wheel, if you will. And so investment is at first was kind of really jumping at those new things, where I said I'm throwing out all the existing technology and created something new. That is now, the brakes are already starting to be applied on that. We're seeing a lot of investment now, really carefully looking at performance. So that's important for growers that are looking at scaling and increasing, producers who are developing systems and all. The same thing. It's very important to show a track record of performance, because no new untested technology is going to be able to pull in solid big investment dollars unless someone is extraordinarily lucky. We've seen a few companies that produce systems that are technically unsound that have gotten significant investment money, but that's really damaging the industry. And as a lot of these failures will start to mount up, and there'll be failures over the next 3 or 4 years of a number of different growing system technologies, a number of indoor vertical types of systems. A lot of those will fail, and that's going to harm the industry. And what we really need to do as an industry is really promote and build upon technologies that are sound.
But what we're talking about here really is large-scale R&D.
Yeah, absolutely.
And historically, that's what the government supported. The government would support that kind of thing. It would start in the universities, and then someone would go out on their own and build something, and it would get a grant to do it, and it would fail, and then the second person will learn from that grant, will develop a system that's a little bit better, and we would eventually end up. I mean, even NASA had massive failures with the space shuttle. So, failure alone is not an indication of lack of viability. It's an indication of growth.
Right.
Right. Anything that man can conceive, man can do. If we can put a man on the moon, I guarantee you we can grow food.
Absolutely.
But it's not intuitively easy. As I said, I spent a lot of time as an organizational psychologist, and training was much of what we did. We operated in that interface between the technology and the people. And everybody is an expert. It's like running a restaurant. Everybody's an expert. I want to open up a restaurant. Well, what makes you think you know about a restaurant? Well, I can cook. No, 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 no. That's not opening up a restaurant. And because you got a farm in your backyard doesn't make you a farmer. You know,
Right.
so the team is becoming more and more and more important, I believe, to the investment community. Who's on your team? What have they done? As you said, performance. What have they done before?
Mhm.
And failure is incidentally is not a negative, as you said. You know,
Right.
failure is a positive. Failure is for except for maybe some political characters I could think of. It's a positive. So and I'm hoping that people out in our audience, people that are going to listen to this in the future and are listening to it now, perhaps, will hear the admonitions and the advice that has come out of this discussion tonight, and make one decision, just one decision, right, that they would not have made otherwise. And then all of this is worth it. All of this time and energy is worth it. So who are the winners out there as far as you're concerned? Who's making a lot of money in hydroponics? Is there any national chain emerging? You know, I've always thought that that's what we needed, is a national chain of well managed, centrally controlled, market driven growing units, urban farms or hydroponic farms. Is anybody out there doing that? Do you see anybody moving in that direction?
Oh yeah, we have. Well, in terms of a national expansion, that's still a little ways off. But we do have, yeah, and we do have a number of players. I mean, we at AmHydro have worked with a number of commercial growers, from Gotham Greens to Loofah Farms, Sky Vegetables, Go Green Agriculture. These are all private sector, for-profit farms that are working hard at innovating. Unfortunately, these aren't the ones that we always hear about. We don't get press coverage. People send me all the time clippings when they know that what business I'm in. They said, "Oh, well, I just saw where you could grow lettuce, on the roof of your car and drive it around, and that's the future of food." And that's okay, but a lot of the real advancements and the companies that are farming and doing well are the ones that really are flying under the radar. We work right now with a shipping container farm company in Beijing, and the reason we work with them is they, very early on, I went over 2 years ago to do some consulting for them, and one of the things that they said to me was, we want to learn how to grow. Not that we want the cool widgets and the gadgets and the lights and the spinny things and everything else, but we want to grow. And when you come at it from that angle, and there are a lot of growers who are doing that, those are the ones that are really making the industry move forward. But those aren't the ones we see all the time.
You know, you mentioned Loofah Farm.
Jerry, this is Wayne. I hate to interrupt, but we are over time. You guys are awesome, but we are having some folks that are having to leave, and we try to keep these to around an hour. So Joe, you should have Joe come back another time, Jerry. You guys got a lot more to talk about. But
yeah, and there's so many good folks. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Wayne, for giving us this platform.
Right. Well, yeah. Jerry, before you go too quick, you do have a few questions here, so we should probably get some of those in. These folks are being patient.
Get ready, Joe.
So you may have dealt with this one, but did you answer the one of, are hydroponics considered organic? Coming from Jenny Harris. She's already left, but she still asked that question. So.
Well, we did address it a bit, Joe. Why don't you go back and again?
With organic production, to be certified organic, and of course we've probably heard.
Hearing me at all?
Yep. So in terms of organic production, we have two factors that we have to look at. We have to look at the nutritional program and then the pest control. So when most people think of organic, they think of pesticide-free, and unfortunately, this is part of the educational learning curve that I think growers need to do, is to understand that the consumers need to be educated on production practices. So organic, hydroponic growers I have for 32 years now grown using completely pesticide-free growing techniques. Now, organic growers, many of them use pesticides. There are allowed pesticides in organic growing. So most hydroponic growers actually grow pesticide-free, which is, in terms of food safety and pesticide chemical exposure, is much cleaner than organic growing. The nutritional component is a little bit different, and so the inputs for nutrients, such as nutrients to supply potassium and phosphorus and nitrogen, in soil or hydroponics can be very different. And that is the one area where most hydroponic growers have had trouble. There's been very little hydroponic nutrient developed yet that is organic based. And of course now with USDA and the kind of political battle over whether hydroponics should be considered organic or not is still being fought. So in terms of organic certification, we do have growers that are certified organic. I personally do not have any organic certification, but all of my pest control is fully organic and beyond organic, if you will. And from a food safety standpoint, it's actually at a higher level than organically grown. So again, it's not an either or. It's not one is better than the other, or it's that they're both very different and they're varying degrees. So long story short, organics is tough in hydroponics, but the organic pest control part is a very, very common practice in hydroponics.
Awesome, good answer. I think we should probably close it out here. I think almost everybody's other questions you guys answered. So you guys were awesome. This is going to be a great recording. Everybody should come and watch and listen to the replay. Tell your friends about it. And Jerry and Dave will be back next week. And I'm sure that Jerry will have Joe on another time with us.
I want to get in with Dave. We could really have a fight. Yeah. It'd be great.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop recording. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Joe.
Have a great night, everyone.
Night.
Bye-bye.